The Necramech. Ancient machines created long before warframes to fight in the old war. Hulking void-shielded sentient pulse-immune weapons that were as bright as a bag of hammers and just as dependable. Not like us. What it feels to pilot one of these things once you get your hands on them is probably the most fun I've had in this game to date. From the sound design that feels incredibly mechanical with yet a subtle hint of something being alive or not inside, while you stomp around, of course. To the incredible damage output of these things once given a decently modded arc gun, or well, this. However, the enemy Necramech you need to fight in order to get yourself your own Necramech might be the most terribly designed enemy in this game. Bit too harsh there? Probably. But before I get into that, let's go back to August of this year, 2020, during TennoCon. This year's TennoCon was a unique TennoCon, to say the least. It was entirely digital. That means that for the first time ever, everyone was able to be present at TennoCon at once, albeit from the comfort of their homes. And during this wonderful occasion, during Tenno Live, I saw something that excited me.
Right, so far below the original structures the Entrati built, some of them still have survived.
I thought, fuck, those things look amazing. Did you see how that thing came from the ceiling? Wow, that looks like a fun fight. Holy fuck. I wonder what mechanics would be involved in the fight against a mech. Lo and behold, the update dropped, and that wasn't the case. These enemies are what I believe are the absolute pinnacle, peak, height, summit, apex, epitome, the very top of obligatory cheese in this game. And it's not like I'm making this up, because these enemies have at their disposal a nullification field that cannot be turned off unless the mech is dead. Status immunity. When using Operator Void Dash, it will disable your ability to cast any ability on top of probably deactivating one that is already active. They do huge damage. They have an invincibility mechanic that they can activate instantly with little to no cooldown. Not to mention being invulnerable on their whole body except for their arms and their weak spot that is on the back, and of course they can turn around on a dime. Damage reduction when crowd controlled, assuming you find a crowd control that works with them on top of the one they already have. I am genuinely confused as to how we are supposed to approach fighting this thing in a way that the devs intended. Don't get me wrong, it's possible, but boy is it not fun. Are we supposed to keep our distance from them and pick on them from afar? Are we supposed to get right on their face with a tank to kill them quickly? Are we supposed to have a distraction to get a clean shot at their weak spot? Are we supposed to disarm them so that they are less of a threat? Or were they designed to be memed by Octavia, providing little to no engagement in what could have been an interesting boss fight? In one of the latest dev streams, during the segment where they were showing the stats on the Helminth system, I saw that a few of the devs were visibly distressed, particularly Scott.
So, yeah, Roar is in the top.
Yeah, see? It's Roar.
Well, yeah.
Lies.
With the fact that players were just going for big damage abilities instead of more non-damage or tactical ones. And, if I may say something here, my guess is that the game's focus on damage and complete disregard for crowd control has probably made players not bother with it, since it will be ineffective most of the time, whereas big damage will always be useful even if it's just a small increment. If crowd control doesn't crowd control, it's useless. However, damage will always be useful no matter the circumstance, and making one useless will only make players gravitate towards the other. But that is game balance and game design, and that is a conversation for another video. But I digress. In the movie The Incredibles from 2004, I swear to God this relates to Necramech, just bear with me. Also spoilers, I guess. Our heroes are tasked with destroying a big robot that does huge amounts of destruction and can seem to still fight with a lot of damage being dealt to it, and is seemingly unstoppable, yet is ultimately beat by itself. Our heroes find a way to make it so that it harms itself and ultimately destroys itself. Now, how does this relate to Necramechs, you might ask, while standing there in your 7 former Umbral Chroma Prime, brandishing a Rapala Sindana and a 7 former Rubico Prime? Well, my dear viewer, my point here is that I feel this enemy was dealt a bad hand when it came to the way that you defeat it. In other words, its design. See, I'm not a developer. However, I believe that taking tools away from the player just to make challenge is not the way to go when designing an enemy. Many warframes rely on one ability for survivability, and taking it away from them just turns them into toilet paper with shield gating. Instead, they could have went with a mechanic that every player has at their disposal, something that by some point in the game, everyone has access to, and can use to a competent degree. I am of course talking about operators. Now seriously, everyone after the War Within will have an operator. And the operators come universally with 5 abilities. Void Beam, which can be augmented via amps, Void Blast, which can be augmented via focus, Void Mode, which can be also augmented via focus, and Void Dash, which can be augmented via focus too, and Transference. All of these abilities are universal to every single player after the War Within, yet they have gone underutilized for the longest time. I'm surprised that the Necramech boss fight has little to no operator involvement compared to the other open-world bosses, like the Eidolons and Prophet Taker. Now, to my main point. Something interesting that could have been done with the Necramech fight is that when it charges at you with its Void Headbutt, you could either enter Operator and Void Blast it, or do something else with your Void powers, to stagger it and disable it temporarily to either deal damage to its weak spot or use Transference to temporarily control it and to make it hurt itself, or something along those lines. Something that was already done in The Incredibles 2004. Obviously, to prevent the mech from being one-shot, maybe gate its health in a similar way to the Jackal. Hell, add a Parazon finisher in there if you'd like. Just do something instead of making it so that the only possible way to beat these things in a timely manner is with a debatably dull strategy of pressing 1, 3, and 4 on Octavia every 30 seconds and occasionally pressing the crouch to keep your invisibility. As well as taking away the honestly aggravating mechanics such as nullifying Warframe abilities, taking away its troublesome damage reduction on being crowd controlled, replacing it with probably more HP, and embrace the fact that operators exist and utilize the universal abilities that each player has at their disposal. Also maybe make it so that when playing solo, the tier 3 vaults and all 3 mechs don't come at you at once and maybe like trickle them one by one. Bounties are already different in solo than in groups. I can't see why the specific one is like this. Now, apart from my fervent distaste in these enemies, I can come to an understanding as to why they are so simple in terms of their design. To an extent. This year has been a shitshow, from start to where we are right now, and I empathize with DE in the sense that working and developing things from home could have been and is a very difficult task. However, if I may, I still think that eventually these enemies are going to be due for a look over, at least to a point where they are an actual enemy that can be fought in a fun way instead of the current ways of doing so. Still, despite having so many layers of artificial difficulty, I still think that the enemy Necramechs have a great potential to be an activity that is interesting and enjoyable, instead of the current obligatory cheese that is in place to beat these things in a timely manner. They could be reworked in a way that actually requires the player to engage with more content in the game, instead of just sticking to damage and nothing else. I personally don't think much will change, since DE have a tendency not to revisit old content often. But, as the saying goes, the last thing that dies is hope, and I am still hopeful that someday something will happen. This has been a kind word on enemy Necramechs. Thank you all so much for watching, and have a wonderful day. Cheers. And cut.